In the aftermath of World War II,
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
Intelligence agencies grew obsessed with the idea of controlling human behavior in extreme situations. Officially, the secret town in New Mexico was called Project Sentinel, a field laboratory designed to observe how isolated populations function without external influence. Construction began in 1949 in a remote desert valley, chosen for its natural isolation and sparse population. The site was hidden by a combination of military secrecy and natural barriers. Project Sentinel's architects built a near-complete town, houses, a school, grocery stores, a clinic, and even a small theater. But beneath the surface, the entire city was a stage. Cameras and microphones were concealed in street lamps, walls, and everyday objects. Every interaction was monitored from underground control centers staffed by psychologists, sociologists, and security personnel. Residents were recruited under the pretense of a social experiment and signed consent forms that promised anonymity and short-term participation. However, many later described a growing sense of entrapment and confusion. Communication with the outside world was cut off. Letters were censored or never sent. Supplies were tightly controlled, and unexplained disruptions became frequent. Surveillance logs reveal incidents where individuals exhibited signs of severe stress and paranoia. One report mentions M17, a male resident, who increasingly isolated himself, expressing fear of being watched and mistrust toward neighbors. His diary, recovered after the site was abandoned, contains entries describing hallucinations and whispered voices. Officially, Project Sentinel ended in 1955 with the town dismantled and all residents relocated. However, the aftermath left a trail of psychological scars on participants. Declassified documents suggest some were detained for further questioning, others lost to disappearances never publicly explained. The experiment remains one of the most ethically questionable social studies in modern history, hidden behind layers of secrecy. With many files still sealed, the initial years of Project Sentinel were marked by controlled optimism from the planners. Early reports praised the seamless functioning of the community. Residents took on roles, formed social bonds, and adapted quickly to their environment. But as months passed, cracks began to appear in the FADE. Surveillance footage shows disputes escalating, small groups breaking off into isolation, and attempts to challenge the authority figures embedded within the town. A critical element of the experiment involved introducing stressors without the participants' knowledge. Power outages, water shortages, and rationing were systematically scheduled. At times, fabricated emergencies were broadcast over the town's public address system to gauge reactions. One such event, labeled Protocol 14, involved a sudden lockdown announcement after a simulated contamination scare. The psychological toll manifested quickly. Medical logs document increased cases of insomnia, anxiety, and hallucinations among residents. M17's diary provides a harrowing personal account of this deterioration. Voices echo behind the walls. I see shadows that no one else notices. I cannot tell friend from foe. Similar reports surfaced from other residents, some describing episodes of extreme paranoia, where neighbors were accused of spying or sabotage. Compounding the distress was the knowledge, or suspicion, that they were under constant observation. Some residents attempted to sabotage recording devices, only to be detained and questioned by operatives posing as town officials. Witnesses recall a pervasive atmosphere of fear and mistrust, with some individuals disappearing overnight, never to be seen again. Declassified internal memos hint at a darker side to Project Sentinel, the use of undisclosed chemical agents intended to test their effects on group behavior. One document refers cryptically to olfactory stimulants, released in air filtration systems during certain test phases. While no official record confirms the substances' identities, some survivors later recounted strange smells and sensations consistent with exposure to psychoactive compounds. By 1954, with increasing incidents of mental breakdowns and social collapse, the project's overseers began debating termination. A final phase was planned to simulate an external crisis, a sudden evacuation order under threat of environmental hazard, to observe collective response. When the experiment ended abruptly in 1955, many residents were found disoriented, exhibiting symptoms consistent with prolonged trauma. The town was swiftly dismantled, with buildings razed and debris removed under strict secrecy. Former residents were dispersed across various states, some given new identities under witness protection-style programs. Few ever spoke publicly about their experiences. Whistleblower testimonies years later would reveal the human cost, hidden behind the military's ambitions. In the years following Project Sentinel's closure, A number of survivors attempted to reclaim their lives, but many found themselves haunted by what they had endured. Psychological evaluations, declassified in the early 2000s, show a disturbingly high incidence of PTSD, dissociative episodes, and chronic anxiety among former residents. The experiment's isolation had fractured not just their social bonds, but also their individual identities. Some reported recurring nightmares about the town's empty streets, the cold eyes of unseen watchers, and an ever-present sense of entrapment. One former participant, who later moved under an assumed name, described the aftermath as a slow unraveling. According to her account, once released, she struggled with feelings of derealization. The world outside felt artificial, like another experiment. Attempts to form lasting relationships were marred by deep-seated mistrust. When she reached out to others she believed had been part of Sentinel, many either denied participation or refused contact, as if under a silent agreement to forget. Documents leaked by an insider in the 1990s revealed that psychological testing continued long after the town's physical dismantling. Covert monitoring program tracked survivors, attempting to measure long-term effects and identify breakpoints in human resilience. Some subjects were enrolled in follow-up studies that involved isolation tanks, sensory deprivation chambers, and controlled social experiments. The ethical lines blurred further as many of these tests were conducted without informed consent. Meanwhile, the physical site of Sentinel remained a mystery for decades. Satellite images from the 1960s show a cleared area gradually reclaimed by desert sands, with no obvious traces of buildings or roads. In the late 1980s, an amateur historian discovered old blueprints and maps buried in a forgotten archive, sparking renewed interest. The maps detailed underground bunkers, observation posts, and hidden tunnels that linked various parts of the town. One map bore a cryptic annotation, Watcher's Grid. Archaeological expeditions in the 1990s uncovered fragments of communication equipment and discarded surveillance cameras, many corroded beyond identification. No human remains or personal belongings were found, suggesting a thorough cleanup. A local elder recounted tales of strange lights and unusual activity in the desert during the 1950s, but dismissed them as wartime rumors. The ethical implications of Project Sentinel eventually drew condemnation from human rights groups, who labeled it one of the most egregious violations of personal autonomy in the post-war era. Yet, official agencies denied the project's existence for decades, citing national security. Only with partial declassification in the early 21st century did the world glimpse the extent of the experiment's scope and its human cost. What remains unknown is the full impact of Project Sentinel's findings. How much did these secret observations influence Cold War policies on civil defense, quarantine protocols, or psychological warfare? And what of the people who lived and suffered in a town that was never meant to exist? One of the most haunting legacies of Project Sentinel lies in the testimonies of those who disappeared without explanation. While official records list dozens of participants, several individuals were marked as unaccounted for after the experiment's conclusion. Whispers among former operatives and leaked communications suggest these people may have been removed for reasons never made public, possibly due to psychological breakdown, attempted escape, or exposure to classified knowledge. An unsettling piece of evidence surfaced in 2004, when a box of declassified audio recordings was uncovered in a forgotten storage facility. These tapes contained intercepted radio communications from the desert during Sentinel's operation. Some captured seemingly normal conversations among residents, but others recorded eerie, fragmented voices speaking in cryptic codes or nonsensical phrases. Analysts speculated these might be distress signals, or the effects of experimental sensory manipulation. Further puzzling was the discovery of one recording labeled Session 17, in which a distressed female voice can be heard whispering, "They watch from beneath. We are shadows in their games." The recording ends abruptly with static and a sudden, loud thud. Its origin remains unknown. Some researchers propose that Sentinel was more than a psychological experiment. They believe it was a prototype for large-scale population control techniques, combining surveillance, environmental manipulation, and chemical influence to reshape human behavior. The town's layout itself may have been designed to induce stress through spatial disorientation, with subtle visual cues embedded in street patterns and building facades. The project's planners reportedly drew from earlier wartime experiments on sensory deprivation and mind control, seeking to perfect methods for managing populations during crises. Yet the human cost proved staggering. Survivor stories describe a slow descent into paranoia, breakdown of social structures, and a pervasive sense of being manipulated by unseen forces. Despite the partial declassification of Sentinel's records, Many questions remain unanswered. What happened to those who vanished? Were their disappearances part of the experiment's design, or a darker cover-up? Did Project Sentinel's findings influence later secret programs aimed at behavioral control? Today, the desert where the secret city once stood is silent, its secrets buried beneath shifting sands. But the echoes of Project Sentinel linger, in classified archives, broken memories, and the lives forever changed by a town that should never have existed. In the years since Project Sentinel, scholars and conspiracy theorists alike have dissected the scant evidence, trying to piece together the true scale and intent of the operation. Official documents show that several government agencies collaborated under strict compartmentalization, including military intelligence, psychological research divisions, and civil defense planners. This fragmented approach ensured that no single entity had a full picture, limiting accountability. A surviving project manager, speaking on condition of anonymity, described Sentinel as a test for the Cold War psyche, a microcosm of society stripped of outside influences, pushed to the brink to observe breaking points. He hinted that the experiment's purpose extended beyond psychology. We wanted to see if we could control social order under any circumstance, if we could engineer compliance without force. The secret city was staffed with embedded operatives who acted as unofficial enforcers and manipulators, subtly influencing events to provoke conflict or cooperation as needed. These individuals kept detailed logs of behavioral anomalies, documenting everything from minor disputes to full-scale social breakdowns. Yet their presence was never acknowledged by the residents, who referred to mysterious, shadow figures, lurking just out of sight. One particular study within Sentinel focused on leadership dynamics. Volunteers were randomly assigned to leadership roles, but the true power lay with those controlling information flow. Observers noted that, when communication channels were restricted or manipulated, even strong leaders quickly lost influence, causing chaos to spread. The experiment's findings reportedly informed later government strategies on crowd control and crisis management. Perhaps most controversially, some historians link Project Sentinel to early developments in psychological warfare tactics used during the Vietnam War. Techniques of isolation, sensory manipulation, and induced paranoia appear strikingly similar to those later employed in interrogation and propaganda operations. The ethical implications of this lineage remain hotly debated. In recent years, interest in Sentinel has been reignited by advances in declassification and freedom of information requests. A few surviving participants have come forward, sharing fragmented memories and cautionary tales. Many warn of the dangers inherent in such experiments, how the desire for control can quickly override humanity, leaving victims with lasting trauma. The legacy of Project Sentinel serves as a stark reminder of the dark intersections between scientific curiosity, military ambition, and human rights. It raises difficult questions about how much power governments should wield over individuals, especially in times of fear and uncertainty. As time passed, the physical remnants of Project Sentinel faded, but its shadow lingered in classified files and hidden testimonies. Efforts to fully uncover the truth faced obstacles. Documents were redacted or destroyed, witnesses sworn to secrecy or intimidated into silence. Still, a few key pieces have emerged to suggest the project's impact extended far beyond its desert origins.
Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.